The Coaching Crowd podcast is for compassionate, courageous leaders, HR professionals, and high achievers. People who are passionate about helping others to find alignment in their lives through coaching and who are thinking of training and developing as a coach.
Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us with our episode today. The focus of our episode is emotions coaching and how to use emotions in a coaching conversation. And the reason we're focusing in on that today is we're often asked what's different about our coaching to other people's coaching. And we often describe the depth of our coaching. And that's where we focus on supporting our clients with their emotional development. And emotions are one of the core pillars of a transformational coaching conversation. So we have values, beliefs, goals, and also emotions.
Absolutely. And, I was reflecting this morning, I was putting some posts on social media. And one of the things that I was sharing is that actually, whilst many people start with goals when they think about coaching, because that's very traditional. You think about how you set yourself something. What's the difference between where you are now and where you want to be? I think behind all of that in the first place is actually how you're feeling. How you're feeling about your life, how you're feeling about your relationships, your career, whether you're feeling fulfilled, whether you're feeling that something is missing. I think that all coaching really at its crux is about emotions. It's just that we don't always bring that to the forefront. And I think there are all sorts of coaches out there, but I think it takes courage and confidence to create a really open space in coaching where emotions are welcomed, emotions are coached, they're encouraged and explored, just as we would explore other challenges and other things that come up in coaching. So great to be able to bring this in an episode to everyone today.
Yes, and people often find the practical nature of okay, so I'm here now, I want to get there, they know what it is. When we explore what the gap is, emotions are one of the things that we might explore in that space. And I find a lot of coaching clients and people actually have quite a limited emotional range. So if we ask people to name emotions, most people would probably be able to name about 7 different ones, and then they'd get a bit stuck. But in reality, there are many, many, many more emotions. And part of coaching is enabling our clients to be able to develop and extend their emotional range, to understand and be able to identify the emotions that they experience in any given situation, and then be able to work out what they want to do with that. So we listen to language in coaching conversations. So what I hear a lot when people are training to be coaches with us as well is people say, my boss made me feel, or that made me feel. And that's quite disempowering language. So one of the things we can do as coaches is listen out and notice the language that our clients use about their emotions. And they're often indications for the beliefs that people hold about their emotions and the relationship that they have with emotions. And you and I have talked many times about how I am somebody who would worry about being emotionally flooded before I, had coaching and have obviously continued to do a lot of training. And you're somebody whose natural place would be more to stonewall your emotions. And here we are together in good company, in our relationship, really focused on empowering people in their relationship with their emotions.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth us talking a bit more about that. And I'll share my experience of stonewalling and hand over to you for the flooding side of it. But emotional stonewalling, in my experience and what I've seen within many, many clients that I coach, is where, one, you don't so much recognize the emotions that you might be feeling moment by moment because you have a relationship with your emotions, which means you sweep them to one side. So you might feel something. If you take yourself far enough to acknowledge that in the first place, you might push it away under the rug or behind the dam, wherever your emotions belong, because either you don't necessarily value it or you don't have the time to give to it. So you keep pushing them away so that you don't need to feel them. And that can have a number of different side effects, I suppose, one of which is around the level of intimacy you experience in your relationship, so how close you let people get to you. Because that dam, if you imagine that you keep swooping your emotions up behind the dam, what eventually happens is that it's so full that you fear that if someone is to poke a little tiny crack in that dam, that all your emotions are going to come out and they'll never stop. And in reality, they will stop because that's what you need in order to be able to process them. But we keep people a little bit at arm's length because those questions about how we're feeling or how we're experiencing things can make us feel really uncomfortable because we're not used to having a close relationship with our emotions. We don't know kind of what to do with them, I suppose. So share with us your experience of flooding, Jo.
Well, I think emotional flooding is when we experience ourselves as being very small in comparison to an emotion, that an emotion can feel bigger than us, can feel like it's going to swallow us up, and where will it end? So actually, there's lots of similar characteristics. As you know, I hear you talking about the impact and the experience of stonewalling, and also flooding. So that flooding is almost like just not being able to breathe with the emotion. I prefer now in my life to think about having this metaphorically, to have this river in front of me, all the emotions float by day to day. Some might get a little bit stuck in the riverbeds, and stay for 10 minutes or an hour, and then actually, they'll kind of get unhooked and off they go again. And sometimes things can obviously get stuck for longer and they might need a little bit of pushing out, and that might be through the support of a coach, for example. So emotions in reality are unmet needs. So they are things that we need that aren't, aren't being paid attention. And so you could also think about them as signals for change. So I like to think about emotions as being friends. They're there to help us. They're there to be a signal for some learning, so that we can live our best and most fulfilled life.
Absolutely. And I think that's where you can bring in the other pillars of coaching. So if you took values, if you want to learn more about values, listen to our podcast that we used around values earlier on in the year. And values essentially are our unconscious needs. And so when we have a value that isn't being met, that's when we'll experience these emotions like frustration, boredom, perhaps discomfort. And as Jo said there, it's a signal that, the discomfort is neither good nor bad. It's just information that some of our needs are not being met. So when we can learn to listen to our emotions and lean into those emotions, we get to reflect and interrogate really, what's happening here? How come I'm experiencing this discomfort? Or how come I'm experiencing this anxiety? Rather than getting lost in the emotion itself of like, oh my gosh, like I'm so anxious, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. Use it instead as information around, how come I'm experiencing that? And that can help you then to set goals, which is obviously another pillar of coaching. When you can hear what your unmet need is through listening to the emotion, you can then start to think about, so what do I need to do or what do I need to become in order for me to be able to continue to move this emotion through? And obviously we'll have a number of beliefs about our emotions as well, and whether a certain emotion is good or whether a certain emotion is bad. And that can really influence the ability to which we're able to connect with the capacity to listen to our emotions. So it's a really, fascinating topic that you can bring into the coaching space.
Yeah, and lots of clients will actually say, I am anxious or I am angry, as if they are the emotion itself. And of course, they are not the emotion itself. It's where there isn't a gap between them and the emotion. And it's like when we can create that gap, that space, that's where awareness can come in. And we can then think about, so what I mean by that is if you say, I'm feeling angry, all of a sudden you create this space where you can breathe and you can think about it. And I think the next thing from that is exploring, what does the anger, for example, want to have happen? Where do you experience that in your body? And then you can start to work with that and actually start to release the emotion. But you need to make kind of full contact with it in order to be able to do that. And another element of this is about thinking about the sequencing of emotions that we experience. So, for example, if you are feeling angry, what was it that you felt just before you felt anger? What is it that you normally feel after the anger has passed? So that people can start to learn more about their kind of patterns, their sequencing of emotions. And that can also help to build confidence as well.
So if that's some things about emotions and different ways of experiencing, like how do we use this with clients? And I think there's one particular tool that comes to mind, which I know both you and I use an awful lot, is the emotions wheel. And this is, you can, if you do a quick search on the internet, you can find lots of different versions of this. But it's about having a central emotion that you might recognize first. So that might be anger, fear, sadness, happiness. So like these are the core emotions that most of us tend to understand. But there are flavors of those emotions at multiple layers. So a flavor of sadness might break out into what the second ring on this wheel is. And it might be sadness might be about loneliness, or it might be about isolation. And then once you've identified your second layer emotion, there's also a third layer of emotion. So what flavor of isolation is that? Is it neglect, or, is it something else? So using a wheel of emotions helps you to really broaden out the range of emotional experiences that you have and the language that you can use. And that's really important, because being able to explain to others, like how often do you get asked, oh, how do you feel about that? And if you can't articulate it, that can make it really challenging for you to process the emotion, because helping somebody else to understand how you're feeling, I think, can often be a really big part of helping those emotions to pass by. So in coaching, we can help our clients not only to make contact with the emotion that they're experiencing, but also to learn how to articulate themselves to others. And just in doing that process, it can be a really releasing way. And of course, once you've released the emotions, you can get on with the action, which is ultimately what coaching is about. So that's where the role of emotions comes in, because coaching is about being action focused and moving forward and making progress. But you can't ignore the fact that sometimes you get stuck. And when you get stuck, it's often because there's emotions at play.
Yeah, and the ability to be able to articulate your emotions is really important, and so is the confidence to be able to do that. And there is a concept within transactional analysis, which is a coaching psychology, which is called racket feelings. And that is when we identify an emotion that we think we're feeling. So for example, if we stick with anger, if we explain or express anger because that's what we think we're feeling, the reality is that sometimes that is like a cover. So it's like an inauthentic emotion. And the authentic emotion beneath that is often sadness. So, for example, if when you were growing up, it wasn't acceptable for you to cry, to have tears, to show sadness or distress, you would have still experienced that at times. But if you weren't allowed to express it, you would have needed to express that energy, because emotions in many ways are purely different forms of energy. You will have learned to express it in a different way. So you might have learned to express that sadness as anger. As an adult, you may still be doing that, unaware that that's what you learned to do in your younger years. So what that means is, if you're in a situation where you're actually really upset, but you're expressing it as anger, you're not going to get your sadness needs met, because people will respond to the anger and will interpret that as anger and therefore respond to that. So actually starting to think about, when you're in situations and you're experiencing strong emotions, just explore, is there a possibility that there's perhaps a different emotion sitting behind this? So one way to do that is to actually explore, when you express an emotion and that person responds to it, do you feel any better? If you don't, then possibly there is another emotion sitting behind that. And I think lots of coaches don't necessarily ask questions about emotions because they're scared that they're going to lift the lid off something that the coachee is not going to be able to cope with, or they feel uncomfortable if a coachee cries, and they'll interpret that as having a meaning. And we need to be careful not to place our own assumptions on, whether emotions are good or bad, because really it's only our thinking that makes it so. So the place to start as a coach or somebody wanting to train as a coach is to really raise your own self-awareness about your relationship with emotions. How comfortable are you with your own full range of emotions? Are you able to access all of those? And how will you be able to create that safe psychological container for a coaching conversation where an individual can bring their full self? They can share what they're thinking, they can share what they're feeling, and they can make those plans of actions that are aligned to all of those. And sometimes, sorry, go on, Zoe.
I was just say, as someone who's experienced kind of emotional stonewalling as a journey on my own kind of development, I find it incredibly liberating when I'm working with a coach and something triggers a thought inside of me that brings that emotion. For my coach to be able to sit there, not dispassionately, because I don't expect them to not show any kind of response, but just in a very accepting way, just to sit there in silence, let my emotion unfold as it needs to. It's such a liberating experience, because if you think back to the different relationships you might have in your life, and as you shared there, Jo, like as a child, perhaps it wasn't acceptable to cry. Even as an adult, when you're upset around your friends, they try and make you feel better. That's a natural human experience, to give you a hug, to console you, to tell you everything will be okay. Or if you're feeling anxious or concerned, a lot of people say, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine. Like they'll try to talk you out of your emotion. Whereas the role of a coach isn't to talk you out of your emotion, it's to accept your emotion as a valid experience. And often that is just an incredibly liberating experience for somebody, to be able to get back in touch with the emotions that they are experiencing, let them come out in whichever way they might want it to be. And for all of that to be a valid and acceptable experience. And as we know as coaches, that emotions are transient and they can be processed, that all of that is okay. Now, obviously, you may get into situations in coaching where those emotions do get sticky and they aren't being processed as easily in the experience of the client. And that's also okay, because as a trained coach, you'll recognize those moments where your clients might need additional support, and you can engage in conversation with your clients about whether those emotional responses are appropriate for coaching and they're getting value from that, or do they need also to engage in additional support? And I think it's about really having the confidence to enter those conversations, because your clients are often so much more resilient, able, capable than perhaps your own experience may have led you to think that if that was the experience you were having, that you would struggle in that situation. So often you don't use that courage because you're bringing your own experience into that coaching space.
Yeah, and we enter the coaching conversations with the mindset of I'm okay, you're okay, that equal relationship. What you'll find, I think, when you're in conversations with people sometimes is we can ask people, how do you feel? And we'll ask them, how do they feel, if we're noticing that they tell us a lot about what they think. So they'll say, I think this, I think that. You look at the language they use in all the sentences. And as a coach, we're looking for, okay, so I hear there's lots of thoughts. What I'm really interested in now is, what do you feel? What's the connection to this? And they will still often answer the question, how do you feel, with, I think I feel. And so as a coach, then we can say, you think you feel, or you feel? And they're like, did I really say that? Did I really say I think? I say, yes. And then we can explore that. We can have laughter about it, because it's just that fascination with it that we want to bring, really, and that curiosity, which opens new possibilities. So when we think about the cognitive behavioral coaching model of thinking, feeling, and behavior, we will tend to have a preference that we lead with. And so those people that lead with thinking can often get stuck in that overthinking. So how do we help to get them out? Well, we do that by asking them, how do you feel? Some people really lead with feeling, and can get flooded. And so we can lift them out by asking them, I hear that you're feeling X, Y, or Z. Tell me what you're thinking. Knowing that you're thinking that and feeling that, what would you like to do next? And some people lead with the behavior, just do. They don't want to think about or feel anything. They just want to say, whoa, hang on a minute. Let's just pause a moment. Tell me what you're thinking as you're about to go off and do this. Tell me what you're feeling. And knowing that you're thinking and feeling that, there might be then an adjustment to the behavior. So there are some very simple models that we can use or introduce with our clients to raise their awareness about the role that emotions play in helping them get from where they are now to where they want to get to.
Absolutely. And look, if you've enjoyed this episode, do come and continue the conversations with us in the coaching crowd, which is our community where we have people who are qualified coaches and aspiring coaches. We share resources in there, and we'd love for you to come and hang out with us there.
And please do subscribe to the podcast. And if you've enjoyed it, let other people know where they can find us.
Thank you for listening to the Coaching Crowd podcast with Zoe Hawkins and Jo Wheatley. We'd love for you to join our inclusive community to learn and grow in the coaching space. Go over to Facebook and search for the Coaching Crowd to be in good company with other aspiring coaches.